because I've got 20 years invested in this career path that has taken us to a place that 95% of the people in my company never made it to. What exactly am I about to playing around with, throwing away here, or changing? And then you start asking yourself, what in the world are you going to do? And how are you going to make good happen out of this? And that's when the meditation and journaling kind of took a life of its own in a weird way. The journaling, I've always said that, there's a truth that lives inside you and it wants out, and it comes out through your hand when you're writing.
Hi, folks. Welcome back to Boom Vision. Today, I got the pleasure of interviewing my new friend, Tom Roberts. Tom is an expat executive coach, and I'm excited to share his story. Tom authentically shares his journey of working and living abroad for over a decade as an expat, taking on 4 international assignments and guiding teams in 11 different countries. As a rising leader in the healthcare company, transplanting his family to multiple countries, how did his spiritual journey blend with his career progression? What was Tom's truth that was inside him that his soul wanted to express when he meditated and journaled? You definitely want to tune in. Let's cue the intro. Welcome to the Boom Vision Podcast. I'm your host, Benjamin Ye. This show is about how to create success on top of a solid foundation of your mind, body, and soul. I created this podcast to give you perspectives and frameworks on how to strengthen your mindset and gain clarity in finding your true north. It's time for you to live an extraordinary life with vision that you design. Let's get to work. Roads were made for journeys, not destinations. This quote was by Confucius. Welcome to episode 20 of the Boom Vision Podcast. I'm excited to share today's interview with Tom Roberts. Tom is a new friend that I got to know through our mutual friend, Cherie Alexander. As you may recall, I interviewed in episode 6. Now, when I think of traveling overseas, whether it's for business or family vacation, I usually see it as destinations. But when I got to know my friend Tom and the journey he went through, personally, professionally, and spiritually, when he and his family lived overseas, I couldn't help but think of a better quote by Confucius. Roads were made for journeys, not destinations. As a brief background, Tom Roberts grew up in Arkansas. After 30 years of diverse business experience, working abroad for many years and interviewing expat executives from the world's largest companies, Tom founded Cranberry Leadership with the goal of making every expat assignment a success for the company, for the expat leader, for the host team, and for their families. Tom and his wife Michelle and his 2 children, Anna Grace and Jack, are happy to call the USA home after 11 years living abroad in Tokyo, Japan, and Seoul, Korea. So without further ado, here's Tom Roberts. Tom, welcome to the Boom Vision Podcast. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Hey, Ben, thanks so much for having me. Really looking forward to it.
Fantastic. And so, Tom, I just, kicking off the interview, love to hear your origin story because you have quite a bit of a journey. Can you talk a little bit about, what you've gone through professionally, personally in the last, greater part of the decade and where it led to where you are today?
Yeah, Ben. So thank you for that. I have a lot of gratitude for the life that we've had for the last 20 years, actually for my entire life. I kind of grew up in a very beautiful small town in a national park. I had parents that were very attentive. I had a lot of good benefits and things that worked out for me in my life, and I'm very grateful for it. My father retired when he was 52 years old, and he was home every day when I got off the school bus. We spent a lot of time together, and you tend to soak in the life lessons of people the more time you spend with them, and I was really, really fortunate to be able to spend a lot of time with him growing up. But I went to college to learn to be a writer, and it was an interesting journey for me because it points out some things that I still kind of struggle with a little bit today, is that when I really enjoyed the curriculum of being in college to learn how to go into the journalism field, it was when I left college that it became very, very clear that journalists starting out didn't make a lot of money. and that wasn't on my agenda. And so I went into the business world, into outside sales, and worked for quite a long time, and then finally wound up in the healthcare industry. After several years of doing that, I decided to move back home closer to my mother and father, who were getting quite old at that time and needed some help. So I actually kind of burned all my suits and bought a restaurant and bar on a lake in the little resort town that I grew up in, and ran that for 5 years. It was kind of like a homegrown MBA at the time, because we ran everything just from our back pocket. But it was a big operation. We had over 400 people that worked for us across the 5 years. And it was a nice experience to kind of grow up. I like to tell people that it was like the best of my life and the worst times of my life all rolled into one. But somewhere towards the end of that, when I was around 30 years old, I met the right girl, and we decided to get married. And it's then that I decided to take all the experiences I had and kind of really become serious about what I wanted to do with the rest of my life, because I'd had really good experiences until then, but I had never sat down and been deliberate about the nature of what is it that I want to do. And so I went back to work in the healthcare industry. Within several months of moving back into that business, I was asked to move to Atlanta with my wife and my daughter, and newborn daughter at the time. We moved to Atlanta, worked there for about 9 years, and then progressively moved my way up the ladder in a pretty quick fashion. I was very fortunate, and also, I had the benefit of this experience outside of corporate America that gave me something just a little bit extra, a little bit tangible that was different. So at that point in time, I worked in Atlanta for about 9 years. They asked us to move to Tokyo, Japan, which was really, really interesting opportunity. My wife had actually done a year and a half living in Japan as a college student, so she knew a lot of the language and felt very comfortable there. So we made the move back. We really didn't ask any questions. We didn't think about it, ruminate on it too much. We just decided to move to Tokyo. And it was a fantastic experience. Spent 3.5 years there. And then once again, they asked us if we would like to move to Seoul, Korea, which in my entire life, I had never dreamt I would live outside the US, much less Tokyo, much less in Seoul, Korea. So we moved to Seoul, lived there for 3.5 years, moved back to Japan for another almost 4 years. And in that period of time, as a couple, we were tested and pushed. It was a very delightful, wonderful experience on the one hand, but on the other hand, we went through the 2011 tsunami and earthquake and nuclear incident that happened in Japan. We were very, very close to all of that happening. My wife was in the hospital for about 5 months. She suffers from Crohn's disease. She's very healthy 99% of the time, but she had a very bad bout when we were there. So we were in the hospital for 9 months, for 5 months while she got better and healed. My son was born in Japan. And then when we moved to Korea, it was still two countries in a state of war between North Korea and South Korea. So the interesting stuff just didn't stop. We were living 30 miles from the DMZ in Seoul with air raid warnings every once in a while and tests and things of that nature. It was just crazy. So that's how we got to maybe 2019. And what that experience taught me was that resilience comes from experience, and that there are really no easy answers to the situations that we face. But the really cool thing that it did was it kind of opened our eyes as a family, not just mine, but all four of us as a family, that people in the different parts of the world live very different lives, and they're resilient like we think that we are, and they have troubles that sometimes far exceed the troubles that we have. And it taught us to have empathy for people that are not like us. And that was a really big driver for us staying as long as we did. We stayed almost 11 years.
Wow. So it sounds like from being in multiple countries, being almost like in, really like a foreign soil in the sense of trying to get your bearings straight, how you're going to plant your roots with not just for yourself and your career, but also your family. That's a lot of transitions and change within like an 11-year span.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's really, it's not hyperbolic to say that each of us came back a very, very different person than we left. And even the most basic things, how we spent our day. For example, we never drove our car. We had a company car, we never drove it. We would take our bicycles to go to the grocery store 3 times a week with backpacks, not because we had to, but because it was just right there. And why not do that? And we built all of this physical exercise and being outside because we lived in a city where you could walk anywhere and do anything. Our kids, it's kind of a cliche and it's kind of frowned upon to say that maybe your child doesn't see color, doesn't see race, doesn't see ethnicity, but my kids grew up in a very multi-ethnic society, living and going to school in these international schools, and they really don't. In fact, one of the biggest challenges of coming back to the States was trying to explain why there were issues going on about race and about gender and about things like that, because in many cases they were so exposed to all of these different things on a daily basis that that was their worldview. That was the way they see things. So yeah, we came back completely different people. And I think that's what kind of led to the transformation that I went through, is because the job that I had when I went there was a job really well suited for the Tom that went to Japan in 2009. But as the 11 years wore on and as kind of forced into introspection that you don't expect, and that forced introspection and those decision points that you have to make on the fly, they change how you view the world, and they change how you view what you want your corner of the world to look like, what you want your part of the world to be, and the change that you want to bring to the world. And it really changes that. It's kept me up at night sometimes wondering what in the world would I have been, what person would I have been if I hadn't have had this 11-year experience. And those are sometimes kind of icky progressions of thought that you go through, because you really do feel like a lot of empathy, a lot of respect for other cultures, and a lot of just resilience comes from being abroad and being forced into these situations. And it makes me wonder what kind of person I would be if I hadn't have had that experience.
So Tom, going a little bit into, after being overseas for close to 11 years, what were either inflection points or chains of events that happened that made you want to come back? Was it through your inner reflection and work that triggered something? Was it, a certain experience that you've gone through? Or, what was sort of your thought process and journey in deciding to come back?
Well, to take back a half a step before we went overseas, my job revolved around spending time with patients, caregivers, elderly, and children who suffered from chronic epilepsy. And it's easy to build up a lot of sympathy and empathy for people who are suffering from chronic debilitating disease, because you see the struggles and everything. And I got to know these people very, very well. I've spent the night in patients that we serve. I've spent the night in patients that we serve's homes. It gets into your being. And so I was sent overseas to kind of duplicate some of these efforts in a very tough society to do that. In Japan, they don't care much about the patient experience. They don't, if someone is not doing well, if they're broken, there are places that those patients go. They don't reintegrate back into society. And so our company's impact was to try to say you don't have to put folks into a different place. You can help people to reintegrate back into society. And that work fed my soul. That work really fed me in a way that I can't describe. It really kept me getting up out of bed very early and staying at work late. And I was interacting with people in a way that mattered. As the progression of my career went along while we were in Japan and Korea and then back in Japan, in the very beginning times, I was doing something very similar. The first 3 years in Japan, doing something very similar and interacting with Japanese patients and caregivers who suffered from epilepsy. And it was even more, because this is a society that doesn't help those too much, and we were really doing good work. When I moved to Korea, which was a fantastic experience for my family and for me from a personal standpoint, I became the president of our operations in Korea, and the work became more about bringing out efficiencies in the business. It became more about handling people issues. It became more about trying to produce more without the direct interaction with patients. And I suffered from that greatly. I could feel that starting to build. And actually in In Korea, I don't mind saying I was diagnosed with major depression after about a year and a half because my work had changed so much and the pressure was there, but I can handle pressure. It was about the texture of the work changing so dramatically that I was
Mm,
staring at a P&L most of the day instead of interacting with real human beings who had real problems that we could try to help solve. And so there came a
mm,
dissonance, and I didn't listen to it all that well. And when I emerged from this kind of depression state in Korea, they offered a chance for us to go back to Japan, which we jumped at in a heartbeat because we absolutely loved living in Japan. We loved the people, and my work had been so rewarding. But as I moved up the ladder, when I got to Japan, I was in charge of almost $1 billion P&L, and that means you stare at it a lot, literally stare at the spreadsheet a lot, and you try to implement programs that can squeeze out 0.5% here and 0.1% there to try to bring back revenue for the company stakeholders. And I didn't listen to my body at that point in time, and I didn't listen to it in Korea. I didn't listen to my kind of my soul and my body because it was such a slow change for me. It was almost like ingesting just a little bit of poison every day. You don't really feel it,
mhm.
but at the end of a year, you feel the effects of 365 days of ingesting just a tiny bit of poison. And so all of the work that was feeding my soul and making me a happy dad and a happy husband and everything else, at the end of a year or at the end of the time that we were in back in Japan, I wasn't that guy anymore. I had changed a lot in the away from work ways, and my empathy had risen. My patience had gotten better. But from a work standpoint, it was taking parts of me that I was freely giving it, and it became a toxicity within me.
Mm,
So I tried to handle it myself, and I became a chronic meditator, which really helped in a tremendous ways. At one point in time, I had 406 days consecutive of meditation using basically just using a Headspace app, which I fell in love with and still love to this day. I started doing morning pages and gratitude journaling during that time, and all of these things just opened up boxes inside that I had never opened up before. And routines bring clarity, right?
yeah.
And discipline of doing those routines, that brings freedom. And the thought that came from these exercises is what really, it's very ironic. In some ways, it felt unbelievably great because I was thinking in ways that I hadn't thought before. I was processing things in ways I'd never processed before. But then on the other side, it was becoming really evident that my work was not matching with what this newfound energy was uncovering down deep. As
Mm,
we started having really real discussions about what is my act three going to be from a career standpoint, but also, what about the family? What are we going to do next? Because it became very clear that when I just listened to my body and my heart, that it wasn't working anymore. It just wasn't
yeah.
working.
Man, I'm just getting goosebumps just hearing this, and that's my intuition telling me because, I mean, we've spoken a few times before this interview, Tom, and just listening to your life journey and mine, there's just so many parallels, right? And what I just got from you earlier is that in this journey you had, and as you're progressing up the corporate ranks, and it transitioned from really being and with the people and the clients and how to best serve them to now more managing a P&L. You're managing ones and zeros. It just shifts really the level of fulfillment that you've initially drawn from the career that made you really fulfilled. But all of a sudden it's like putting the dark shades and it's like you have no sunlight anymore. And it's like, where am I
Yeah.
getting the sun, right? And I love the fact that having that meditation 406 days straight, that is really impressive, man. Like, but that journey of meditating, that repetition, like you said, repetition, routine gets clarity. And part of it, meditation can mean different things for different people, but the baseline of it is just quieting the mind. And if you do it on a consistent basis, you're not reacting to external factors, but then you're really drawing from within what really makes you fulfilled. What, you get more a distilled way of connecting the dots internally of, what is it that you want rather than just always defense blocking and reacting, right? Is what I've gotten. And it sounds like, through that experience, it got to the point where it's just like enough's enough.
In a way, it came to that exact point. I think that the hardest part is when you have built a life, and I had been working for this company by this time for 20 years. When you build a life around one thing, you become part of that, you internalize part of that. That's kind of who you are. And one of the key drivers for me to really examine things is that my boss at the time, who I absolutely adore to this day, he told me, he said, I love listening to you talk about what we do as a company. He said, because many of us talk about sales figures and we talk about footprints and where we're going to be operating in next. And he said, you talk about individual patients and you talk about caregivers and the stories of children and the stories of elderly people. And he said, you talk about that in a way that says this company does good by helping individuals. But the second thing that my boss said, he said, I never hear you talking about stories that have happened in the last 6 years. So that's a throwaway comment. Like I walk away, I'm like, I didn't even think about that. And then it was during meditation and journaling, and I was starting to think, I really stopped and I said, do I talk about anything that's happened in the last 6 or 7 years? And it was interesting. The only things that I really spent a lot of time talking about was my family's life because their life had gotten so much better. Those are individual stories, about people, individuals doing things. We had lived overseas and they had gotten all these great experiences. But I never talked about the work. I talked about my previous work, the work that I had done with the company before. And that caused me to do a lot of deep introspection, and all that journaling and everything. It paid a lot back in terms of clarity.
Yeah.
But the problem, Ben, is that when you get clarity and you're so wrapped up in what you're doing, it's like, what the hell do I do with this now? So on one far end of the spectrum, I can keep doing a job that is not killing me. It pays me quite nicely, and it's keeping my kids in interesting places, and it keeps my wife pretty happy. Or I can unspool all of that and start over at my age, which is not old but not young, right? So it's a huge gap, and in that gap, you start to really question, am I losing my mind here? Because at that level in an organization, as I was in kind of the top 5% of leadership in an organization. You're surrounded by people with that exact same thing going on, that they feel like their life is kind of defined by the work that they do, as opposed to being a part of the work that they do. So I couldn't even go to my colleagues and sit and talk about this and say, look, here's what I'm feeling, because they would look at me like, are you kidding me? You've worked this long to have this kind of salary, this kind of benefits, to live overseas like you are, to have the things that are you kidding me? And so you kind of bury it even a little bit deeper, and you worry about being able to talk about it.
Yeah.
But they offered us 2 more years, right in the middle of all this introspection and thinking and everything. The company comes back. We were supposed to move back home at the end of 11 years, and they came back and they said, we want you to stay 2 more. And I was like, oh my gosh, okay. I need to think about this. And they're like, what do you need to think about? You love it over here. You're doing really, really well. You've never had a bad job, performance review. What is there to think about? And I'm like, there's plenty to think about, guys. And that was the scariest time of our lives. My wife and I, every time we had just moved. Said, let's do it.
Yeah.
But this time, in my little office in our little apartment in Tokyo, there's like 10,000 Post-it notes on the wall where we're trying to figure out what is the right thing to do and what is the wrong thing to do.
Yeah.
And very thankfully, I've got a wife that could see parts of death that were going on in my soul, and then she recognized it.
I love to go a little bit deeper on that, Tom, because, what's interesting is that in the initial move to Korea, you started, what I heard from you is that you started getting a glimpse of your body or your intuition, your heart reaching out saying, hey, this might not be the path you want to be on, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't something where, even knowing those signals, what do you do about it? So it wasn't something you immediately act on. And then what I heard is that once you came back to Japan, once you started that 406 days of meditation, something slowly tried to transformed in you where your intuition came, but then now you're paying attention to it, right? Can you tell
Right.
me a little more of, was the sensation just a little bit different? Was it what the way you received it different? Or what was the thought process you went through and how you responded when your intuition was telling like, hey, this is maybe it's a time for a change. Maybe it's time to make that third chapter.
Well, I would like to tell you a grand story about revelation and waking up in the skies parting everything, but it looked much more like when my son was 4 years old and I had to tell him no 50 times for the exact same thing. At the beginning of meditation, of my meditation practice, which I still carry on, I really wish I had not skipped on that 407th day, but I've been meditating now since that period of time, which was a long time ago, 2015.
Yeah.
The answers uncover themselves very slowly, right?
Yeah.
And then it's not just the uncovering slowly, it is the lack of belief inside of saying, what am I hearing? What am I really hearing here?
Mm.
Because I've got 20 years invested in this career path that has taken us to a place that 95% of the people in my company never made it to. What exactly am I about to playing around with, throwing away here, or changing? And then you start asking yourself, what in the world are you going to do? And how are you going to make good happen out of this? And that's when the meditation and journaling kind of took a life of its own in a weird way. The journaling, I've always said that, there's a truth that lives inside you and it wants out, and it comes out through your hand when you're writing, because we've all had the experience of writing a little bit and being very prescriptive about what we're writing. And then we've all had that experience of starting to write and then waking up like 10 minutes later going, I don't remember writing any of this stuff. And then having to kind of go back and re-immerse yourself in it. And there's a truth inside us that wants out. It needs air, it needs sunlight, it needs
Mm.
sunshine.
Yeah.
And my disbelief that I could take a different type of path kept tamping down the truth.
Mm.
And my truth is very used to being tamped down. It's like I tell myself a lot of things to get through the day, but at the end of it, the silence of meditation and the freedom and autonomy of this hand as I wrote were what allowed these covered up things to come to the surface.
Mm.
And it's only because of the deliberate nature of the practice that it came out. If you're going to dig 100-foot hole, it's one scoop at a time. And I didn't get those truths until I had dug really deep through a lot of silence and a lot of writing.
Yeah.
So there was no grand revelation. In fact, there was a lot of times of me, I can remember thinking, man, my body is trying to tell me something. I'm hurting. I mean, like joint pain. Like I'm not healthy as I once was.
Mm.
And this has to be related to the work that I'm doing and what I'm going through.
Mm.
No, that's not what it is. I mean, you're just getting a little bit older. That's not what it is. And then the next day, yeah, my soul is not soaking this experience up the way that it used to.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's nothing. You're having a bad day. You're having a bad day. So with me, it was scoopfuls of dirt excavated over time that finally brought clarity to what was down there kind of pulling me,
Yeah.
if that makes sense.
It does, Tom. It's really beautiful because so this is what I got from you is that it's interesting because when I'm listening to you talk and the energy I'm feeling is that when you talked about taking a little poison every day, when you're in that, call it the first half of that 11 years, the other analogy that comes into mind is, that frog that's in the pot, right? And,
Hmm.
and it doesn't know it's in boiling water, right?
Hmm.
Because if you increase the temperature little by little, it feels like it's in a sauna. It doesn't realize it's boiling, right? Until you really jump out of it or you get killed by it, right? And it's interesting how you went through that boiling water or that poison, but then your transformation was also gradual as well. And what kickstarted that was a combination of just meditation and journaling, because that combination of being able to quiet and calm your mind in conjunction with having an outlet of the expression that wants to come out from your soul, from your heart, because we get those thoughts and I call it a wind tunnel, right? I mean, we got a lot of thoughts going on today, especially when you're forced to operate on such high speeds, right? In the position that you're in. I get it because I've been there before, right? Like it's you feel like you're in a hamster wheel that's on speed 10, and it's like, okay, but and you're used to it because that's the rhythm you are, but then there's not a lot of room for inner reflection when it's working like clockwork. But it's beautiful to hear that meditation, but also journaling allowed yourself the space and the form of expression to really uncover what is it that your heart really wants. And as much as a gradual being in the boiling water, you're also the way you got out wasn't immediate, but it's also very gradual where when it came to re-up and another 2-year renewal, you're like, wait, I think we're done here is what I got. Right?
Kind of. Yeah. Yeah, it was exactly that. But I got to be honest with you, it was the scariest time for all of us, you know.
Yeah.
We had to have individual talks with each one of our children, and then my wife and I spent a lot of time talking to each other. So I think that the lesson I learned, that actually it became kind of a tenet of the work that I'm doing with expat executives overseas, is that speed does not equal speed.
Mm,
Speed of thought, speed of your intuition, speed of anything doesn't equal speed, because most of the time when you make hasty decisions or you go with something that's, a heuristic from your past, you have to revisit it at some point in time, because you didn't make the right decision, you didn't think it completely through. So we've kind of, through a lot of just iterations and everything, we kind of came up with this equation of like patience plus reflection equals speed, because you can make a decision in this period of time, but if you have to revisit it 5 times, then the end point of getting to something that's satisfying is longer.
mm,
If you do the work on a daily basis and deliberately, then that patience and that reflection, it actually becomes speed, because you're making decisions that are better in a better way. And I think that's
mm.
what I had to learn over and over again, was that every time that I would say, nah, that's not what I'm not hearing that from my body. That was just me trying to make a fast decision. That was me trying to make a fast cover up of something that I was feeling. But when I did the work and when I did the deliberate work, that's when I understood that I've got to reflect, I've got to have patience, and that's what's going to lead me to getting where I want to be faster.
Yeah, that's awesome. So how I interpret that, Tom, is that when you say speed is not speed, what I got from your sharing is if you're quick to respond, then you're in responsive mode. But if you have the patience and calm to digest what's happened, and then it's almost like a flip of a switch. It's like I want to be in creation mode. What do I want to create rather than respond? Then
Exactly.
that's a different energy coming from within than it is about just reacting to what's happening externally in your life.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I hate to poo-poo over 100-year-old saying, but your life is not about following your heart, because your heart will lead you to some crazy places. Sometimes it'll lead you to the right place, but your life is not about following your heart. It's really about examining your heart.
Hmm.
And it's about taking the time to question your heart. And then it's about listening to what it has to say back to you in reality, and not confusing your desires with what your heart's really trying to tell you. Because sometimes what's in here is something you don't want to hear, right? So
Mm,
when people say, well, I'm just following my heart, I worry intensely about them, because I followed my heart before and my heart told me to stay put, or I thought my heart was telling me to turn left instead of turning right. Most often I felt like my heart was telling me just stay on this path. But the reality
mm,
was, it was about quieting myself to a point where I could examine and question and listen
mm.
to what my body and my heart was trying to tell me. And then you just have to join hands with it and move forward. Once you've done that deliberative process and you've listened and you really have felt it, then it's about joining hands and with your heart, moving forward and taking the steps forward.
Yeah. Even though things and thoughts can come from your heart, there's a distinction between, is it heart giving an impulse or is it giving something that's saying this is what fulfills? Because those are very two different things, right? And that's sort of how I compartmentalize kind of the different messages I'm getting, right? Because they all have different frequency and energy that I feel when I know is it impulse or is it really from a place of, heart-centered and more fulfillment kind of related. But you have to be able to, again, going back to quieting your mind, because then you'll be able to really understand that distinction. Otherwise, it'll just be jumbled. And,
Yeah.
just saying you're following your heart as a broad stroke encompasses a lot of different host of not just emotions, but also kind of different decisions too, right?
Yeah.
Gotcha.
But
Gotcha.
it's
Yeah.
worrisome, it's worrisome. So there's so many times where you hear people give advice to young people. It's like, follow your heart. Yeah, but it's like, know your heart
Mm,
and listen to your heart, because your heart changes.
yeah.
And the only way you can know your heart and listen to your heart is to sit quietly.
Mm,
I don't care what religious background people come from. There is a time when the hero of the story is alone in the wilderness. And what is he doing during that time? Is he just sitting and praying and begging for miracles to happen? No. He's listening and he's hearing and he's listening. And these stories have been told to us from every tradition around there.
yeah.
If we're not quiet, you can't hear. And the
Yeah.
only way in today's world to be quiet to hear is through deliberate practice. There's just too many things competing for our attention.
Right. So that actually leads to my next question, Tom, which is whether you're working with your clients, and it sounds like the main group are expats, right? For our listeners that either might feel stuck in the career they're in or in the business they're in, where there's just disconnect, there's a gap between what they feel versus, the sense of fulfillment they might not be feeling, right, in the current path they're on. What advice would you have to share in helping them turn that around?
Well, obviously, everybody's situation is different, right?
Right.
The two most important words that I've centered my work around that have kind of emerged, right? When I work with clients, the two biggest words when someone gets stuck is to be deliberate and to not just let the day's events come at you. You have to be present with yourself so that you can start the process of really listening and listening to what your body's trying to tell you. I had aches and pains, and I had depression at one point in time. These are not just trials that I'm going through. This is the body trying to tell you something, that
Mm,
you're out of alignment and you're in a sense of an area of dissonance where you've got to realign and achieve some kind of harmony. So when I talk to them, it's really about asking, are you being deliberate with how you're examining your own motives and your own role that you play? One of my favorite coaches, Jerry Colonna, he asks a question all the time: how are you complicit in these events that you don't desire, right?
mm,
And it comes around to that, because if you listen to yourself, you start to see, okay, part of this is my fault because I'm ignoring the warning signs. I'm complicit in these bad days because I'm ignoring the warning signs that I've been hearing. So I try to tell people to be deliberate and to listen to their heart and their closest confidants. A tool that we're putting together at Cranberry that we'll be deploying sometime this year is called the Expat Table, which is just a catchy name for being deliberate about the people that you surround yourself with, right?
mm.
I love that cliched old saying that is, we are the five people that we're surrounded by the most. We're the
Yeah.
average of the five people that we're around the most. So, being deliberate about finding that truth sayer, the
Yeah.
person that will tell you the truth at all costs. Be deliberate about finding a soothsayer, someone who has kind of elder experience, who
Mm,
understands how to tell you things from a perspective of longitudinally, a perspective of history. Find somebody that's like your industry sage, your spirit guide, somebody that can help you with with finding your place within the universe, somebody that's your workout partner, your consigliere who understands laws and can give you advice. Being deliberate about surrounding yourself with these people to make yourself a better decision maker about these things. So listening, surrounding yourself with the right people, and getting help from an objective third party. This is what saved me from myself. I had a total of 5 coaches across the 11 years that I was in Asia. 2 of them for very specific purposes, like cultural coaches, and then 3 that were more in the executive/living, life coaching type. And those people I had some good ones and I had some really bad ones. And what all up, those people are the ones that made the difference in my life. And that's why I decided to try to learn how to be that person for someone else.
Mm.
Uh, Getting objective third party help that has the right level of experience, both kind of ivory tower academic experience, but also real life experience of doing whatever it is you have a problem with, is just so critical. And that's what I tell people. So be deliberate. Be deliberate about all these things. Make sure that you're moving with discipline and deliberation towards what you want to do.
Yeah, that's beautiful because it's very similar when I share to my audience, but also my clients on, what's your soil, water, and sun. In my terms of what I say by soil is your environment where you're rooted in. In the same token of what you mentioned, the 5 people you surround yourself is you're some average of that. And the soil you're in, is it nourishing you or is it pulling you down? Because that, if you're intentional with that and where you want to be rooted in, that has a tremendous impact, not only just on yourself, your energy, but also how you process decisions, right? In terms of influence that you get. And then the water is, are you watering your mind every day? Are you nourishing it on a consistent basis? And the sun is where you get your fulfillment, where you're getting your sun rays. Because if you don't get that level of fulfillment, then it's almost like you're running empty in a treadmill, not knowing where it's going.
That's exactly right. That's a beautiful, beautiful analogy. And
Yeah,
two of
yeah,
the three don't work.
right.
If you have
It's
two
got to be
of the
all
three,
three.
it doesn't work.
That's right.
And I think sometimes we get trapped in the fact that two of those elements may be working fantastically, and we're like, okay, I don't want to rock the boat. I don't want to mess up these two that I've got going on, so I'm going to leave everything alone. But the reality is, it takes all three of those things to grow, and so that's a beautiful analogy. I like that very much. I'm going to steal that, Ben.
No, please do, man. Please do. Like, look, we're here to inspire transformation in people, right? And that's what I love about you, Tom. And for people, for me, I always live in this mindset where rising tide raises all ships. So absolutely, if that serves you and serves your audience, please, it's something where I just want. I didn't have this language before when I was growing up, right? And it's like, hey, if I don't see it being spoken into, like I gotta create it and hope people can use it. So I love that.
Well, and I'll add one thing to that is that when
Yeah.
you're growing up, you didn't have that language. But in certain business environments, and I think you and I share some similarities in that, in certain business environments, even if you know that kind of language, it's a little bit taboo to start talking about it, right?
Mm,
That sense of mission with many companies does not go past the mission for the company into wellness of the people that make up the company. And, I found myself, once I decided that there was another facet of Tom that needed sunlight and air and soil, I found myself secluded because there was nobody within my circle that I could talk to about it because they weren't speaking that language at that time. It was still all about the business stuff.
yeah, I can relate to that. I really can. So, Tom, question I always ask my guests is if the DeLorean and a time machine existed where you can travel back in time 10 years ago to be able to give your younger self a piece of advice, what would that be for you?
That's a tough one
Mm.
because I needed all kinds of advice when I was younger.
What's the first one that pops into mind?
I think the first one that comes to my mind is to find a way to become very proficient and highly, highly engaged in your work because it drives a lot of goodness.
Hmm.
But don't become so self-identified by your work that it's the only goodness that you feel like is going on. So back to my story, when I was working with these patients every day, every week, I mean, flying all over the country and spending time with these patients, my heart was full. And so when your heart is full, you're like, this is who I am. But then as circumstances of my work changed, I still self-identified with the work and with the company and with the industry I was in, but the heart fulfillment was not there anymore.
Mm.
And so I think what I would tell probably is get really good at your work and be really highly engaged in it and be curious about your work. Where can I find the fulfillment? But don't start your conversation with my name is Tom and I am a XYZ at ABC company. That's not our Japanese colleagues struggle with this, and I've coached members of my team about this, the Japanese colleagues, members of my team, because Japanese folks become highly, highly self-identified to the point to where with painting with a broad brush, many people alienate themselves from their family because they become so self-identified with the work that they're doing.
Yeah.
And that's just, it doesn't work. And I think secondly, it would be foolish of me to say that being deliberate about all of these things is meaningless if you don't have the kind of the financial means to have choices. And we've been very blessed with that, but it also came with a lot of hard work. And so I think if I could tell 20 years ago, Tom, something, it would be that financial independence is a real thing. And when opportunity to make some wealth appear in your life so that you can do more good for people, when that comes, you should take it and save it and manage it, make it work for you so that at one point in time you have options.
Hmm.
Because you can want to follow, you can observe your heart and you can question your heart and you can listen to your heart and you can finally follow your heart. But if you don't have the means to do that,
Yeah.
then it's very difficult. And the reality is I'm better served by the freedom to make choices with what makes my heart sing
Hmm.
than I would have been if I had spent a ton of money on a new car every month or a new car every year or something like that, you know.
Right.
And then I think the final thing is just reflection and patience. It's these things have to come with time. And yeah, I wish I had
Uh,
somebody to tell me that a long time ago.
well, it's really interesting to hear your sharing because it's very indicative and consistent with kind of your journey too. It's do you give yourself the runway and space? It starts with permission. And once you give yourself permission and you create that space, then you're really creating the stepping stones to get to that next third and fourth step rather than just only looking at what's right in front of you. And that's what I got from you is that yeah, it's having all those three things, soil, water, and sun, harmonize, not just only two to three, but all three to build the right foundation. But to do so, the financial independence, financial freedom. Some people might be able to just change things on a whim, but some people don't. And if you're not, it doesn't mean not to act on it. It just means you got to give yourself that runway, you got to give yourself that space.
Yeah, and more specifically, even than that, if you're filling a hole in, a gap in your heart with material things, you need to stop and question yourself immediately
Yeah.
because it may feel so good as a 28-year-old person to get that brand new car that you've never thought you would own. But at the end of the day, that feeling goes away in 2 weeks. And
Yeah.
and what are you filling your heart with, you know?
Yeah.
And whereas when you do get some security in your finances, you have routes that you can take different paths. And we were so fortunate to be in that position so that
Yeah.
when my body and my heart was telling me it was time to move on, that we had that option to do.
And the other thing I just want to point out is this association with your identity to the job title. That's really interesting because I think, we spoke offline about this, but as you know, I love movies, and one of the things I brought up was Shawshank Redemption, right?
Hmm.
And one of the things is when you think of the character Red or, all these different prisoners in that prison, it comes to a point where when you're in it for so long, you get institutionalized. And that sense of feeling of attachment to the establishment, to the rituals or the routines and what it stands for, the more attached you are to that title, the harder it is for you to be able to perceive of letting that go, to really know what is it that you want, right? And it's not an easy process. It takes time for people to be able to unwind. But kind of what you did with your coaching are you attached to the work that makes you fulfilled, or is it more about the title? Right. And it's wherever you put your focus and attention to. You call it, being more deliberate, right? And for me, how I interpret that is it's about intention and also your focus in terms of what is it
Right.
that makes you feel fulfilled. Fantastic. So, Tom, where can our audience find you?
So our website is cranberryleadership.com, where we put a lot of our writing and tools and things up. You can visit us there. There's several ways to connect with us through that. I think I'm most active. This is something I need to work on. I'm most active on LinkedIn. I get a lot
Hmm.
of good conversations back and forth on LinkedIn. So I am Tom Roberts, founder of Cranberry on LinkedIn, and you can find me there. And honestly, that's where a lot of really great discussions happen, kind of behind the scenes with the work that we're doing. But I would love to have folks reach out and talk about their situations. Another thing that I would really like to say while I'm on here is that one of the ways that we have tried to figure out if we're right in a lot of our assumptions about how expats live and how expats kind of progress through the stages of living abroad is we've been having really intense discussions with individuals who are living overseas. So to date, we've had almost 24 long form discussions with expats, and we've come to know them as our kind of our expat council, where we go to if we have something that puzzles us, we go and reach out to them. But if anyone would like to add their own distinctive story to the stories that we're trying to create with Cranberry, please reach out to me via LinkedIn or via cranberryleadership.com, because we're constantly looking for new people to add to this soup of goodness that we're trying to create with different people. I have learned so much from sitting with people both the people that I know that I've interviewed and people that we don't know. It's not a podcast. It's a one-on-one interview that we just use to feed our data and to support the work that we're doing. So it's if anybody's interested, reach out.
Awesome. And I'll include all your information in the show notes, so you'll definitely get taken care of. And really take up on Tom if you're an expat living abroad and you just need someone to talk to, right? And
Yeah, for
that
sure.
or stories to share. Quick question I had. Why the word cranberry? Does it have any meaning for that? I'm
Yeah,
curious.
it does. It's an interesting thing. I did not want to hang a shingle and say Tom Roberts Consulting or something like that. And so a consultant coach that you and I both know, we worked together very, very hard on trying to figure out what the name was. And one night I was sitting with some colleagues or some friends, not colleagues, some friends, and we were drinking wine, probably too much wine. And somebody said, well, just tell me exactly what it is you're trying to do. And I said, look, it's like a cranberry. If you go and you're not prepared and you go and you try to change everything in a foreign country all at one time, it just leaves everybody with a bitter taste. But if you blend your experience and your needs and wants with the needs and wants of the people that you're coming into, then it blends and it makes the most pleasant cocktail of goodness that you can imagine. And I kind of sat back and I had my glass of wine, and they were like, wow, well, that's a story. Where'd that come from? Why don't you ever share that? And I was like, because it just came to me right then. Because I was the individual cranberry when I first went overseas. I tried to make all of my Asian problems solvable with American solutions, and it doesn't work. And in that period of time when I'm trying to do this, I made everybody angry or made everybody not want to work with me. And I left everybody with a tremendous sour taste in their mouth.
Mm.
And once I started trying to blend myself into the culture, but also retain what I was supposed to be bringing to that, when we started blending, then magic started happening. And so that's where Cranberry Leadership came from.
I love it, man. I love it. I didn't know that. That really resonates with me for
Our
sure.
mutual friend says that I need to lean into that story more, but because I don't tell it very often. So
Gotcha. Well, Tom, it has been such a pleasure. I guess before we sign off, is there any other questions I didn't ask today that you wish I did?
oh no, I mean, I just really appreciate what you're doing here is by highlighting stories of people that are doing things a little bit differently and saying it's not really that different. If you listen to what's going on inside your head and your heart, and you're really perceptive to the surroundings around you, then things work out better, And I really
Yeah.
appreciate you highlighting these stories. You do it in a very different way than I'm trying to do, and it brings richness and texture to these really important points that as we go through our lives that we need to be listening for. So I really
Yeah.
appreciate what you're trying to do.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you so much. What I got from that is really just listening to different perspectives, because it helps you
Yep,
ask different questions, right?
for sure.
Thank you so much for sharing so genuinely of your story. If I can be of any help to serve you in your journey, I'm here for you.
You
And
bet.
I really appreciate your time today and sharing your words of wisdom to our audience today.
All right. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Wow, I hope you all enjoyed listening to Tom's international journey. There's so many words of wisdom that Tom shares. The top 3 takeaways I got is that number 1, speed does not equal speed. As Tom mentioned from his own experience of inner reflection, it's patience plus reflection that actually equals speed. The second takeaway is that your life is not about following your heart. It's about examining your heart. By being introspective, examining and truly listening to your heart, you're minimizing the chance of not confusing your desires with what your heart is truly trying to tell you. In my own words and how I interpret this, it's being able to distinguish what your intuition, your soul GPS, is trying to signal to you, rather than your inner voice that may be from your ego or your old SOS programming, your subconscious operating system. And the third and final takeaway is be deliberate. You have to be present with yourself so they can start listening to what your body is trying to tell you. One question that one of Tom coaches shares is that, how are you complicit in these events that you don't desire? Are you ignoring the warning signs that your body is trying to signal to you? Please feel free to share this episode with your family, friends, or colleagues that may feel stuck, especially if they're living in a foreign country that's away from home. If you haven't already, please hit subscribe to the Boom Vision podcast so that we can travel this journey together in building a solid foundation of our mind, body, and soul. Please leave a review if this has made a positive impact in your life. This would really help share the word and reach others that can really benefit from this show. Until next time, folks, be kind to yourself, be in the light, be you. Thank you so much for tuning in to my Boom Vision podcast. If you'd like to find out more about me and this podcast, head over to benjaminye.com. That's spelled BenjaminYeh.com. If you haven't already, click subscribe, and I'll catch you next time.